is having issues. The growth is still rather sluggish. Unemployment is increasing. Inflation, as we found out this morning, is still a stubborn problem. What's your diagnosis of the ills of the UK economy? What are the problems that continue to plague the UK economy at the moment?
What? Oh, ladies and gentlemen, strap yourselves in. Grab your tea, grab your biscuits, and perhaps a pillow to scream into, because what you're about to witness is the political equivalent of watching someone trying to juggle jelly while standing on a trampoline in a thunderstorm. Yes, today we are diving into a spectacle so gloriously awkward, so magnificently muddled that even Shakespeare himself would have struggled to script it. We're talking about Rachel Reeves standing before a committee of MPs trying to sound like the captain of HMS Britain, but instead steering us all straight into the rocky shores of verbal chaos. Before we show you the full video of the debate, I'd like to ask you a small favor. If you appreciate this content, please take a second to like this video and subscribe to the channel. Over 98% of you watch the videos without subscribing. It costs you nothing, but it makes a huge difference to us. So, did you click the subscribe button? Great. Thank you so much. Now, back to the video.
Key problem is productivity, and sort of investment is the answer. Investment in human capital, investment in physical capital, and also investment in new technologies. That's both public and private sector, but I think we've got the lowest private investment and lowest total investment as a share of GDP of any country in the G7. The result of that is that our productivity performance has not kept pace with our competitors and similar countries around the world, and that's why the fiscal rules that I've set out do treat investment spending different, because what you saw, and you saw this in the previous Parliament, and the plans that we inherited saw public investment as a share of GDP fall to 1.7% to GDP, and we're instead going to keep it at 2.5%, 2.4, 2.5% of GDP. The easy thing to do as a Chancellor is to cut capital spending, because, frankly, you're not likely to be the government that sees the benefit, the full benefit of that capital spending. But we're not going to keep making those short-sighted, wrong decisions, which is why we set out those changes to the fiscal rules. But productivity, I regard as the key reason why our performance on government borrowing and debt, why our performance on GDP and our performance on inflation have all been not where we would want them to be. And my job as Chancellor is to turn that around.
Thank you very much. Lord Lonsborough.
Good afternoon, Chancellor. Can we zero in on what you describe as the key problem of the economy, which is the critical issue of low levels of productivity in the UK? And we continue to lag France, Germany, the US by very wide margins, about 12 to 20% in terms of output per hour. And we have done so for decades. Now, the UK's productivity in this first quarter has actually fallen by 0.2% compared to a year ago, and it's standing now at just 1% higher than it was 5 years ago. And it may well drop in Q2, given what's happening to GDP numbers. So my question is, how is the government seeking to address this productivity challenge? What specific policies will turn the dial, and when can we expect to see results?
Yeah, so there are sort of three things that affect, I guess, the productivity numbers. It's physical capital, labour supply, and that's the quality of the labour supply, so human capital as well as the numbers, and then total factor productivity, so technology. On capital, I'd say, sort of an assessment of the first year. I think on physical capital, that's where we've done most in this first year. I've mentioned the £120 billion of extra CDEL capital spending by the government over the 5-year period, keeping capital spending by government flat as a share of GDP rather than it falling actually quite substantially, which is the plans that we inherited, but also using financial transactions through the National Wealth Fund and the British Business Bank and other public financial institutions to have additional capital spending, and then using things like the National Wealth Fund to leverage in private investment, 3 times as much private investment, and actually that's a model we've used as well for Sizewell C, where the National Wealth Fund is the sort of debt underwriter for that project. And as I said to Lord Pettygas, we've managed to bring in £120 billion of private investment just in this first year of the Labour government. On labour supply, you would have seen, despite the increases in the unemployment rate, we've also seen an increase in the employment rate. And those two things can obviously be consistent, because what we've seen is a reduction in economic inactivity. And that's really positive, because we are still the only OECD country, I think, that's got a lower participation rate in the labour market than before the pandemic. And so reducing those economic inactivity numbers are absolutely crucial. The first step is that you move from being inactive to looking for work, and then hopefully you move into work. And there are still around 650, 700,000 vacancies in the economy, and we want to better match the people that are available for work with the jobs that are available, and we want to help those people who are currently economically inactive, whether that's because they took early retirement and maybe now perhaps regretting that, and that is the experience of some people during the sort of COVID period, whether you are a parent who is struggling to balance work and childcare, or whether you are one of the growing number of people on sickness and disability benefits, where we know that there are many people who are desperate to work but are not given the support. We also, in the spending review, invested significantly in both apprenticeships and further education, because that has been the sort of Cinderella service of the education system this last decade and a half. It's great that we've got 50% of kids going to university, but the 50% who don't, which in my constituency in Leeds Western Pudsey, that'll be the majority of kids don't go to university. So investing in FE and apprenticeships is really crucial for this government and our wider objectives around opportunity. So we've done some of that spending review, but I certainly think that's an area where we can do more to address the productivity issue through improving labour supply and human capital. And then the last thing is around sort of technology, total factor productivity. And Andy Haldane, former chief economist at Bank of England, talks about this long tail of low productivity firms. And the DSIT secretary, Peter Kyle, he's sort of got 3 focuses in his area. First of all, it's attracting businesses that are at the technological frontier. Obviously, that is crucial for growth, and we're very good at that in Britain. We've got a lot of very high-skilled people. I was at Imperial College this morning. That's an area where we are good, but we shouldn't rest on our laurels. The second area is using technology better in delivering public services. That's this issue about not just how much we spend on public services, but about getting value for money. And then the third is the sort of point around that long tail of productivity, about better take-up of AI and technology by smaller businesses and less productive firms. And so we're working in all of those areas, and there is a big opportunity. The IMF and others say that if we integrate AI and technology, we could boost productivity by 1.5% over the next 10 years. So there's huge opportunities there, and we've got to seize them. But we are very focused, as I hope you can tell, on that agenda.
And can I ask you about the fiscal impact of continuing low productivity, in that the OBR admits that its productivity forecasts are, to quote them, the most important yet uncertain forecast judgments they make, and they admit to the fact they've been successively too optimistic on productivity forecasts. And if current productivity trend forecasts that are assumed by the OBR of 1% growing to 1.2% over the forecast period to 2029 currently looks very optimistic, and certainly that's the Bank of England's view. What will be the fiscal consequences if productivity continues at the current low rates, which averaging about 0.2% per annum over the last 5 years?
Yeah, so the OBR forecast long-term productivity growth of 1.25% a year, and the Bank of England have a forecast of 1% a year. Both are very low by historic standards. Productivity over a long period of time is higher than that, but as you rightly say, the last decade and a half has been lower. So I guess you've got to decide whether you think that you should just look at a short period of time for what average productivity is, or long-term productivity, or whether you should look at a longer time series. And the OBR, as they've said, are looking at that at the moment. But perhaps I'll pass on to Steve to give a bit more detail.
Yeah, I mean, I saw the evidence David Miles gave, and I think he gave a sort of balanced assessment of where the OBR had come out, which is that they think that productivity has been depressed by a series of shocks over the last 15 years. But even abstracting from that, they're certainly not expecting productivity to return to the pre-financial crisis levels of 2.5%. Right. But equally, you can veer into the too pessimistic, into the views that the recent numbers we've seen of 0.2 are like to persist, and their view was that there were reasons both to expect that the sequence of shocks might not continue, but also that there is potential for future technologies, in particular AI, as a potential new general purpose technology, to be a source of the innovation that you need in TFP growth that supports their forecast of productivity gradually picking back up to 1.25%. I think one of the elements I would add is to the list that the Chancellor gave of policy measures is the impact of the government's planning reforms to support productivity, which the OBR scored as increasing GDP within the 5-year forecast, which is also a very good example, I think, of coming to your first question, Lord Wood, of how is it possible to sort of increase productivity given the constraints of the fiscal position. I think those steps on planning are a really good example of how it is actually possible to do that.
My concern is probably more about the short term, in that the current forecast in the OBR looks very optimistic, and I'd say ripe for downgrade, and that's echoed by the consensus of independent forecasters. And I think the Bank of England has actually downgraded its productivity forecast to 0.6 or 0.7%. So that's going to have an immediate fiscal impact this autumn, is it not?
The Bank of England's forecast of productivity, long-term productivity growth, is 1%.
Long-term, yes.
Yeah, and that's what sort of drives the models, really. But the OBR is higher than that. The number I gave you earlier was just slightly wrong. So the IMF analysis suggests AI could boost UK cumulative total factor productivity over the next 5 years by 1.4%. And so I guess that's the point that sort of Steve Farrington is making, that there have been a series of shocks over the last few years, whether it's the sort of global financial crisis, COVID, Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine, that have all had a negative effect on productivity and growth. But actually, if you look at some of the underlying drivers of productivity, there is perhaps a reason to be more optimistic in the future if we can contain some of those shocks, in part by building a more resilient economy, and that's what we're trying to do with clean energy, homegrown energy, for example. But some of those underlying factors about the increasing use of technology might give us a bit more cause for optimism.
Now, picture it. The room is stern, mahogany, punly. Serious faces peering down like school teachers about to catch a child sneaking a Mars bar in class. Reeves sits there, papers in hand, the look of a student who hasn't done the homework, but is hoping that if she says the word productivity enough times, no one will notice. The MPs are sharpening their questions like knives at a carvery, and then boom, the grilling begins. Madame Chancellor, one begins, leaning in with the smirk of a cat about to toy with a mouse. What pre-tale is your diagnosis of the UK economy? And what does Reeves do? Well, my friends, she does what any of us might do if cornered in a pub quiz about 14th century Hungarian poets. She stalls. She stammers. She repeats herself like a broken record at a charity shop. Well, obviously the UK economy is yes. 3 is for the price of 1. Like a supermarket bargain gone wrong. It's like she thought if she just bought enough vowels, she'd win the political edition of Countdown. She then launches into what can only be described as a word salad tossed with extra dressing. Productivity, investment, capital, technology. Oh, she flings them about like confetti at a wedding. The only problem is none of it lands. It's like she's serving soup with a fork. She insists that Britain has the lowest private investment in the G7, that the key is human capital, and that her fiscal rules are, quote, different how, like wearing your socks over your shoes is different, perhaps. The MPs nod, eyebrows raised so high they're practically levitating. And then the follow-up question comes like a jab from a prize fighter. Yes, but Chancellor, how exactly will you fix this productivity problem? You've said the word 12 times, but we'd quite like a plan. Cue Reeves, blinking like a deer, caught in the headlights of a Maurice Minor. She launches again into her economic sermon, this time with a new garnish: apprenticeships, education, AIO. Yes, now she's pulling technology out of the hat like a magician who forgot the rabbit. Apparently, if Britain just embraces artificial intelligence, productivity will shoot up faster than a cricket ball on a summer's day. One almost expected her to suggest that Siri and Alexa should be given ministerial posts, but the MPs aren't buying it. They press again. Forgive us, Chancellor, but we've heard this before. When exactly will we see results? And Reeves? Oh, Reeves gives us the classic politician's response. Results will come in the future. Ah, yes, the future, that magical land where all promises live happily ever after. Cheaper railways, lower taxes, more jobs, unicorns dancing down Oxford Street. It's all going to happen in the future. Then, as if sensing the ship is sinking, she tries to pad out her answers with examples so specific they sound like filler in a GCSE. She talks about Imperial College. She talks about Leeds, Podsy. She even name drops Sizewell C, as though a nuclear power plant will somehow fix productivity faster than she can say AI is the answer. At this point, the MPs are circling. They bring out the big guns. Statistics. Yes, the dreaded numbers. They point out that productivity has actually fallen by 0.2% in the first quarter, that the UK still lags behind France and Germany, and that forecasts are looking grim. It's like watching someone bring receipts to an argument. Anne Reeves, bless her, nods furiously, agrees with the problem, and then once again tells us that apprenticeships and leveraging private investment will save the day. Friends, if she said private investment one more time, I half expected her to pull out a telephone and start cold calling investors herself. Hello, it's Rachel from HM Treasury. Can I interest you in a 2-for-1 deal on productivity? And just when you thought it couldn't get more muddled, she pulls out the grand finale. Technology. Not just any technology, mind you, but artificial intelligence. Apparently, according to Reeves, AI will be the knight in shining armor that gallops in. and rescues Britain from its productivity woes. Yes, forget infrastructure, forget education, forget the economy's structural issues. It's AI. Ladies and gentlemen, the robots will save us. One half expected her to summon R2-D2 into the committee room and make him chancellor. But then, oh, the twist. The MPs point out that forecasts have been too optimistic before, that the OBR keeps getting it wrong. That productivity isn't bouncing back anytime soon. And what does Reeves do? She passes the buck to Steve. Yeah, Steve. Somewhere in the Treasury sits a man named Steve, and apparently he has the answers. Reeves, in her moment of need, turned to Steve like a contestant phoning a friend on Who Wants to Be a Millionaire. Now, Steve, bless him, tries to sound serious. He talks about planning reforms, long-term productivity trends, and the IMF. But by this point, the committee looks less convinced than a cat listening to a dog explain calculus. The MPs press harder. What about the short term? What about the next few months, the next few years? And Reeves once again defaults to her favorite land of fantasy optimism about the future. Oh, my friends, this was not just a grilling. This was a banquet of bafflement. Reeves was roasted, sautéed, and flambéed before our very eyes. Her answers circled round and round like a carousel. The same words: productivity, investment, AI going past again and again until you half expected circus music to start playing. And yet there is a certain charm in the chaos. Because in her stammers and her stuters, in her desperate attempts to weave a coherent story out of fiscal spaghetti, Reeves revealed something universal, that politicians, when pressed, often have less of a plan than a pigeon in Trafalgar Square. They fluff, they bluff, they repeat, and they pray that the clock runs out before the questioner notices. So, what have we learned from this glorious debacle? Well, we've learned that productivity is apparently the magic word of the day. Say it enough times and maybe, just maybe, people will stop asking you to explain it. We've learned that private investment is the holy grail, though it's supposed to come from remains a mystery. We've learned that AI is the Deus ex machina. The shining star Reeves clings to like a child, clutching a teddy bear in the dark. And most importantly, we've learned that if all else fails, just call on Steve. Yes, this was more than a grilling. This was performance art, a theatrical display of political dodgeball, a masterclass in saying many words while revealing almost nothing. Reeves didn't just blab. She orchestrated a symphony of blabbering, a concerto of confusion, a whole opera of obfuscation. And for that, dear viewers, we must thank her, because in these gray days of dreary politics, sometimes a little comedy is exactly what the economy needs. So next time you hear Reeves talk about productivity, don't picture graphs or statistics. Picture her juggling those words like flaming torches, hoping one doesn't drop. Picture her whispering "I like it's a magic spell." Picture Steve in the back room clutching a stack of spreadsheets, wondering how on earth he got dragged into this circus. And remember this, politics may be about policies, but sometimes it's really just about performance. And today Reeves gave us a performance that deserves a standing ovation. Not because it inspired confidence, but because it entertained us more than the last 5 episodes of East. So raise your teacups, my friends, to Rachel Reeves, to productivity, and to Steve. Long may the blabbering continue, for it keeps us laughing, and perhaps, just perhaps, it reminds us not to take the whole circus too seriously. Thanks for watching this satire video till the end. Please subscribe, like, and share this satire video with your loved ones so you can put a smile on their face. Thanks once more.